The mud was still wet on Simon Cartwright's boots when he realized the boundary stream had moved itself in the night, and judging from the tracks in the soft earth, the orc woman who owned the land to the west had been standing on what used to be his side of the property line for the better part of an hour already. He could see her now in the early morning light, a figure in a dark coat standing perfectly still near the new channel the floodwater had carved through the low ground, her green skin catching the pale gold of dawn. She had not moved when he splashed across the old stream bed, now nothing but a depression filled with standing water and debris. She had not moved when he climbed the slight rise to where she stood. She only turned her head when he was close enough to speak without shouting, and her dark eyes met his with an expression he could not quite name. "Cartwright," she said. Her voice was low and calm. "Miss Farnley," he replied, keeping his tone equally neutral. Cara Farnley had bought the western property 2 years ago, the first orc to own land in this valley, and she had done it legally, with money earned working the harvest circuits north of here. Simon knew this because everyone in the township knew it, had discussed it, had argued about it in the tavern and the church hall and at every market day since. He also knew it because he had checked the deed records himself when he heard the news, standing in the dusty records room in town with the old ledgers open before him, looking for some flaw that did not exist. "The stream moved," she said. "I can see that. 40 yards west by my count. Maybe more at the northern end." Simon looked at the new channel, a raw gash in the earth still running with swift brown water. The spring flood had been the worst in 20 years, 3 days of rain that turned every watercourse into a torrent and reshaped the land in ways that would take months to fully understand. He had spent yesterday walking his own property, checking fences and drainage, counting the damage. He had not come to the western boundary until this morning. "The old law says the boundary follows the water," Cara said. "The new law says it stays where it was surveyed." "Depends on which survey you mean," Simon replied. "My grandfather's survey in 1780, or the township survey in 1802, or the county survey in 1815. Or my survey from 2 years ago, which cost me 60 silver and was signed by a licensed surveyor from the capital." "Surveyor from the capital," Simon said, and he heard the edge in his own voice. Man who had never seen this land before and never will again. Man who spent 2 days here and went home. Cara turned to face him fully. She was not a large woman, for all that she was an orc. She came to his shoulder, perhaps a few inches more, and she was built lean and strong in the way of someone who worked hard for a living. Her tusks were small, barely visible when her mouth was closed, and her dark hair was pulled back in a thick braid that hung down her back. She wore working clothes, practical and well-made, and her boots were as muddy as his own. "Your point being?" she asked. "My point being that I have lived on this land my entire life. I know where the boundary was. I know where my father's land ended and old Jeremiah's land began, back before you bought it. And this stream has always been contrary. It shifts. It floods. It cuts new channels and abandons old ones. The boundary is not the water itself. The boundary is the original channel, the one that was here when the first survey was done." "And when was that?" 1780. "Before either of us was born. Before my grandfather was born, but the records are clear." Cara looked at him for a long moment, and then she looked back at the new stream channel, and then she looked at the land between the old channel and the new one. 12 acres, perhaps a bit more. Good bottomland, fertile and flat, the kind of ground that grew excellent hay and better grain. Worth real money. "The records are not clear," she said finally. "If they were clear, we would not be having this conversation. They're clear enough." "Then show them to me." Simon hesitated. He had the old survey map at home, folded in a wooden box with the rest of his father's papers. He had looked at it 100 times over the years, tracing the boundary lines with his finger, memorizing the landmarks and distances. But he had not looked at it recently, had not checked it against the current landscape in any systematic way. He knew what it said. He knew what it meant. Or he thought he did. "I will fetch it this afternoon," he said, "and you can bring yours. We will compare them." "Fair enough," Cara said. She tilted her head slightly, regarding him. "You know this is going to be a mess, I know. Lawyers, arbitrators. Maybe even a court case if we cannot settle it. I know that too. And in the meantime, we are neighbors. We share a boundary. We will see each other at market and church and every other place people gather." "I do not go to church," Simon said. Cara blinked. "Neither do I," she said. "But you understand my point." "I do." They stood in silence for a moment, and Simon became aware of the morning sounds around them. The rush of water in the new channel, the calling of birds in the trees that lined the old stream bed, the distant lowing of cattle, his cattle on his land. Or what used to be his land before the flood rearranged everything. "This afternoon, then," Cara said. "Bring your map. I will have mine ready." "Where do you want to meet?" "Here." "Where else?" Simon nodded. He watched as she turned and walked back toward her own farmhouse, visible in the distance across the fields. She moved with an easy, ground-covering stride, not hurrying, not looking back. He stood alone on the disputed ground and felt the old anger rising in his chest, the anger his father had carried for 20 years after losing his own boundary dispute, the anger that had made his father hard and bitter and impossible to please. Simon had sworn he would not become that man. He had sworn he would be fair and reasonable and willing to compromise. But this was his land, his family's land, and he would not give it up without a fight. He walked home slowly, his mind already working through the arguments he would make, the evidence he would present. He had the old survey. He had his father's notes, made over years of farming this ground. He had his own memory of where the boundary markers had been, before time and weather wore them away. He had right on his side, or so he told himself. By the time Cara Farnley crossed back to what she was absolutely certain was her own land, the sun had climbed higher, and the morning was warming into what promised to be a fine spring day, the kind of day that should have been spent working in the fields, not arguing over property lines. She went into her small farmhouse, pulled off her muddy boots, and retrieved the leather tube that held her survey from the shelf where she kept her important papers. She unrolled it on the kitchen table and weighted the corners with whatever came to hand. A cup, a knife, a small hammer, a book. The map was beautifully drawn, every line precise, every measurement noted in a clear hand. She had paid good money for this survey, and it had been worth every penny because it proved beyond any doubt that she owned this land legally. The purchase had been contested, of course. There had been letters to the magistrate, meetings at the township hall, angry speeches about tradition and property values and the proper place of orcs in human society. But in the end, the law had been clear. She had the money. The seller had been willing. The deed was transferred. And now Simon Cartwright was going to tell her that the boundary was not where the survey said it was. Cara sat down at the table and studied the map, following the western boundary line with her finger. It ran north to south, following the stream that divided her property from Cartwright's. Or rather, following the stream as it had been 2 years ago when the surveyor did his work. The map showed the channel, showed the distance from various landmarks, showed the acreage on each side. There was no ambiguity. The stream was the boundary. Except that now there were 2 streams, and Cartwright was going to argue that the boundary was the old one. She could see his point in a way. If boundaries could shift every time a stream changed course, then property ownership would be chaos. But the law had to be flexible enough to account for natural changes. It had to recognize that the land itself was not static. And if the law said the boundary was the water, then the boundary was the water, no matter where the water happened to be at any given moment. Or did it? Cara rubbed her eyes. She had not slept well, had woken before dawn with a feeling of unease that she could not name, and had gone out to check her fences and fields as she always did. She had come to the western boundary more or less by chance, drawn by some instinct she did not quite understand, and had found the new stream channel and realized immediately what it meant: trouble. She rolled up the map and slid it back into its tube. She would bring it this afternoon as promised, and she would make her case and she would not back down. This was her land. She had worked hard for it, saved every penny, made do with less so she could afford it. She had put her labor into it, cleared the brush, repaired the fences, plowed the fields. She had earned it, and she would not let Simon Cartwright take it from her. The afternoon was warm and bright, and Simon arrived at the disputed ground with his survey map tucked under his arm and his temper held carefully in check. Cara was already there, standing near the new stream with her own map in hand. She looked up as he approached, and Simon saw the same determined expression he had seen that morning. This was going to be a long discussion. "Let me see yours first," Cara said. Simon unfolded his map, and they spread it out on the ground, weighing the corners with rocks. The paper was old and fragile, the ink faded in places, but the lines were still clear. Simon pointed to the western boundary. "There," he said. "The boundary follows the stream called Willow Creek, from the north property corner south to the township road. That is what the survey says." Willow Creek, not the new channel, the original creek. And where is Willow Creek now? That is the question, is it not? Is it the old channel which has been the creek for as long as anyone remembers? Or is it the new channel which has been the creek for exactly 3 days? Cara knelt down and examined the map more closely. "This survey is from 1780, she said. "More than 80 years ago. How do you know the stream has not changed course a dozen times since then?" "Because my family has farmed this land for 3 generations, and I have my father's notes and his father's notes, and they all agree. The boundary has always been where I say it is. Show me the notes." Simon had not brought the notes. He had not thought he would need them. He hesitated, and Cara saw the hesitation and pounced on it. "You do not have them with you. I have them at home. Then this conversation is pointless until you bring them. My map is enough. Your map is 80 years old and does not account for any changes in the land since then." "My map is 2 years old and was made by a professional surveyor using modern instruments. Which one do you think is more accurate?" Simon felt his jaw tighten. "The age of a map does not determine its accuracy, and your surveyor spent 2 days here. 2 days. My family has been here for 3 generations. And in those 3 generations, did anyone bother to update the survey, to have a new one drawn, to confirm that the boundary was still where your family thought it was?" Simon did not answer. The answer was no, of course. Surveys were expensive. The old survey had been good enough. Until now, Cara stood up and brushed the dirt from her knees. "This is not going to be resolved today," she said. "We need more information. We need the township records, the county records, any other surveys that have been done of this area. We need to know if there is any case law about boundary disputes involving moving water. We need an expert opinion." "We need an arbitrator," Simon said, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. "An arbitrator, just like his father had needed 20 years ago. Just like his father had hired and lost to, and never forgiven. If we cannot agree on our own, then yes, Cara said. "We need an arbitrator." They looked at each other across the spread of old paper and new grass, and Simon realized that this woman was not going to be easy to beat. She was smart and thorough, and she knew the law. She was not someone who could be intimidated or worn down. She was going to fight for every inch of ground just as he was. "I will get the rest of my documents," he said, "and I will meet you here tomorrow, same time." "Fine," Cara said. She picked up her own map and rolled it carefully, and Simon saw that her hands were steady, her expression calm. She was not afraid of this fight. She was ready for it. And so, despite himself, despite everything, he felt a small flicker of respect. The argument became a pattern. They met at the boundary every few days, sometimes more often, and each time they brought new documents, new evidence, new interpretations of the law. Simon brought his father's notes, which showed the location of boundary markers that no longer existed. Cara pointed out that the markers could have been moved, could have been wrong to begin with, could have been wishful thinking. Simon brought a letter from an old neighbor who remembered the boundary from 50 years ago. Cara brought a geological survey that showed the stream had changed course at least twice in the past century. They argued over the definition of a boundary. They argued over the meaning of phrases like natural feature and original channel and permanent marker. They argued over the reliability of memory, the accuracy of old maps, the intentions of long-dead surveyors. They argued until the sun set and the mosquitoes came out, and then they went home and thought about what the other had said and came back with new arguments. It was exhausting. It was infuriating. And somehow, despite everything, Simon found himself looking forward to it. He did not examine that feeling too closely. Spring turned to early summer, and the crops came up green and strong, and Simon spent his days working his land and his evenings arguing with Cara Farnley. They hired an arbitrator, a dry old man named Thaddeus Wren, who had handled property disputes for 40 years and had seen everything. He came out to inspect the land, listened to their arguments, examined their documents, and said he would need time to research the matter. How much time? Simon asked. "As much as it takes," Wren said. "This is not a simple case. The law is ambiguous. The evidence is contradictory. I will not rush to a decision." "We are paying you by the day," Cara said. "Then I suggest you settle it yourselves," Wren replied. "It would be cheaper." But they did not settle it. They kept arguing. And as they argued, Simon began to notice things about Cara Farnley that had nothing to do with boundary disputes. He noticed that she had a dry sense of humor that came out when she was making a particularly sharp point. He noticed that she knew a surprising amount about crop rotation and soil management, and had opinions on the best way to plant barley. He noticed that she was scrupulously fair in her arguments, never twisting the facts, never making claims she could not support. He noticed that she was, in her own way, beautiful. That thought startled him badly enough that he missed part of what she was saying and had to ask her to repeat it. "I said," Cara repeated with a slight edge to her voice, "that the county survey from 1815 supports my interpretation, not yours. The boundary is described as following the stream, without any qualifications about original channels or historical courses. The stream is the boundary. The stream has moved. The boundary has moved. The county survey was done for tax purposes, not for defining legal boundaries," Simon said, dragging his mind back to the argument. "It was meant to establish acreage, not ownership. It still describes the boundary, in general terms. Which is all we have, because no one bothered to maintain proper records. My family maintained records. Your family maintained notes. That is not the same thing." They were standing by the new fence Simon had started to build, a line of posts driven into the ground along what he believed to be the true boundary. Cara had objected to the fence, had said he had no right to build it until the dispute was resolved. Simon had said he had every right to fence his own property. They had argued about that for an entire evening, and Simon had gone ahead and started building anyway. The fence was now 3/4 complete, and every time Cara saw it, her jaw tightened. "You are going to have to move that fence," she said. "Not unless the arbitrator says so. The arbitrator is going to say so. The law is clear." "The law is not clear. If it were clear, we would not need an arbitrator." Cara made a frustrated sound and turned away, and Simon watched her walk along the fence line, running her hand over the posts. Her fingers were long and strong, the nails cut short, the skin marked with small scars from years of hard work. She stopped at the northern end of the fence, where Simon had left off, and looked back at him. "You know what your problem is, Cartwright," she said. "I imagine you are going to tell me. You are too stubborn for your own good. You have decided what the truth is, and now you are bending all the evidence to fit that truth. You are not looking at this objectively. You are looking at it through the lens of what you want to be true." Simon felt his temper flare. "And you are not. You bought this land 2 years ago. You have no history here, no connection to it except a piece of paper and some money. I have 3 generations of family on this ground. I have memories and knowledge and a lifetime of understanding this land. And you think your 2-year-old survey trumps all of that?" "Yes," Cara said flatly. "I do. Because the law is not about feelings or memories or family history. It is about what can be proven, and I can prove that my land extends to the stream. You can only prove that your family believes it extends to the old stream channel. Belief based on 80 years of continuous occupation. Belief based on an old map that may or may not have been accurate to begin with." They glared at each other across the half-built fence, and Simon felt the frustration coiling tight in his chest. He wanted to shout at her, wanted to tell her that she was wrong, that she did not understand, that this land meant something to him that she could never comprehend. But he also knew, in some deep part of himself, that she was right. The law was not about feelings. The law was about evidence and documentation, and what could be proven in front of an arbitrator or a judge, and his evidence was not as strong as he wanted it to be. "This is getting us nowhere," he said finally. "Wren said he would have a decision by the end of summer. We should wait for that." "Fine," Cara said. "But stop building the fence." "No, Cartwright, it is my fence on my land, and I will build it where I see fit." Cara looked at him for a long moment, and he saw something shift in her expression, something he could not quite identify. Disappointment, maybe. Or resignation. "You are making this harder than it needs to be," she said quietly. "I am making it exactly as hard as it needs to be." She shook her head and walked away, and Simon watched her go, feeling the familiar weight of his father's legacy settling over him like a cloak. His father had lost his boundary dispute, had spent 20 years bitter about it, had died believing he had been cheated. Simon would not make the same mistake. He would fight for what was his. He would win. He had to. Summer deepened, and the weather turned hot and dry. Simon worked his fields, watching the sky for signs of rain that did not come. The crops needed water. The pastures were turning brown. And the new stream channel, which had been running swift and full in the spring, began to slow and shrink. The old channel, meanwhile, was still holding water, fed by a spring somewhere upstream. It was not a strong flow, but it was steady. Simon noticed this, and he knew Cara must have noticed it too, but they did not discuss it. They were not discussing much of anything these days. They had moved past arguing into a kind of cold formality, each of them waiting for the arbitrator's decision, each of them unwilling to give an inch, And then the problem started. The first problem was drainage. The hot, dry weather broke in late July with a sudden violent storm. 3 inches of rain in 2 hours and both farms flooded. Water pooled in the low ground, drowning the crops, and Simon realized that the new stream channel had disrupted the old drainage patterns. Water that used to flow south into the township ditch was now flowing west into Cara's land, and water from her land was backing up into his. The second problem was the fence. The section Simon had built was blocking a natural drainage path, and now the water had nowhere to go. It sat in stinking pools, breeding mosquitoes and rot. Simon surveyed the damage and swore under his breath. He was going to have to dig new ditches, rebuild the drainage system, possibly tear out part of the fence. It was going to cost time and money and effort he could not spare. And he was going to have to talk to Cara about it, because the drainage problem affected both farms. He found her that evening, standing in her own flooded field, staring at the standing water with an expression of grim frustration. "We have a problem," Simon said. "I noticed. The drainage is wrong. The flood changed it, and my fence is making it worse." Cara turned to look at him. "Your fence is making it worse," she repeated. "Yes, the fence I told you not to build." Simon gritted his teeth. "Yes. The fence you built anyway, because you are too stubborn to listen to reason. Are you going to help me fix this, or are you going to stand here and say you were right?" Cara regarded him for a moment, and then, to his surprise, she laughed. It was not a happy laugh, but it was genuine. "Both," she said. "I am going to say I was right, and then I am going to help you fix it, because if I do not, we are both going to lose our crops." They worked together over the next week, digging drainage ditches and clearing channels. It was hard, dirty work, and they did it mostly in silence, speaking only when necessary to coordinate their efforts. Simon tore out the section of fence that was blocking the water, and Cara helped him dig a new ditch that ran along the base of the slope, carrying the water away from both farms. Slowly, the fields began to drain. The water receded, leaving mud and debris, but also hope. Some of the crops could be saved. Not all, but some. On the last day of the drainage work, they stood together at the outlet of the new ditch, watching the water flow away toward the township drainage system. Simon's back ached, his hands were blistered, and he was fairly certain he smelled worse than his own pigs. Cara looked equally battered, her clothes caked with mud, her face streaked with dirt. "Thank you," Simon said. Cara glanced at him. "For what?" "For helping. You did not have to." "Yes, I did. It was my land too. Your land that I was trying to take." "That you are still trying to take," Cara corrected. "The drainage project does not change that." "No," Simon admitted. "It does not." They stood in silence for a while, and Simon found himself thinking about the past months, the endless arguments, the stubbornness on both sides. He thought about his father, bitter and angry, unable to let go of a loss that had defined the last years of his life. He thought about what kind of man he wanted to be. "My father lost a boundary dispute," he said suddenly. 20 years ago. The same stream or near enough. He believed he was right and he lost, and he never forgave anyone for it. Not the neighbor, not the arbitrator, not even himself. It ate at him until he died. Cara did not say anything, but she was listening. "I swore I would not be like him," Simon continued. "I swore I would be reasonable, that I would be fair. But the moment this dispute started, I became him. I saw it as a matter of honor, of family pride. I stopped thinking about what was right and started thinking about what I could not afford to lose." "What changed?" Cara asked quietly. "Working with you this week. Seeing that we could cooperate, that we could solve a problem together. Realizing that maybe winning is not the only thing that matters." Cara turned to face him fully. Her dark eyes searched his face, and Simon had the feeling she was weighing his words, testing their sincerity. "I do not want to give up my claim," she said. "That land is mine, legally and morally, but I also do not want to spend the rest of my life fighting with my neighbor. I do not want to be the person who cannot compromise. So where does that leave us? I do not know. Waiting for the arbitrator, I suppose." But Simon was not sure he wanted to wait for the arbitrator anymore. He had seen how that ended in his father's life. He had seen the bitterness, the regret. He did not want that for himself. He did not want that for Cara either. The arbitrator's decision came in late August, delivered in a formal letter that neither Simon nor Cara wanted to open. They stood together at the boundary, the letter in Simon's hand, and looked at each other with something that might have been apprehension. "You want me to read it?" Simon asked. "I suppose one of us has to." Simon broke the seal and unfolded the letter. He read it once, quickly, and then again more slowly. Then he handed it to Cara without a word. She read it, her expression unreadable, and then she folded it carefully and handed it back. "Inconclusive," she said. "He says the evidence does not support either claim definitively. He recommends we settle it ourselves or take it to the county court, which would cost more money and take more time and probably end with the same result. Probably." They stood in silence, and Simon felt the weight of the past months pressing down on him. All the arguments, all the anger, all the stubbornness, for nothing. The arbitrator could not decide, the law could not decide, it was up to them. "There has to be a better way," Cara said. "There is," Simon said. "We could share it." Cara looked at him sharply. "Share it?" "The disputed 12 acres. We could agree that it belongs to both of us jointly. Use it as common pasture or hay ground or whatever makes sense. Split the costs, split the benefits. That is not a standard arrangement, I know, but it would work. We have already proven we can work together." The drainage project showed that. Cara was silent for a long moment, and Simon could see her thinking it through, weighing the options. Finally, she nodded. "I would want it in writing, a formal agreement filed with the county so there is no question later." "Agreed." "And I would want equal say in how the land is used. That is what joint ownership means. And I would want the fence removed, all of it. If we are sharing the land, there is no boundary to mark." Simon hesitated. The fence had been his line in the sand, his statement of ownership. Removing it felt like surrender. But it was also, he realized, the right thing to do. If they were going to share the land, they had to trust each other, and a fence was a barrier to trust. "Agreed," he said. Cara held out her hand and Simon took it. Her grip was strong and warm, and they shook on it there in the middle of the disputed ground, sealing the deal that the law could not provide. Over the next weeks, they drew up the agreement with the help of a lawyer in town, filed it with the county, and began the process of actually sharing the land. Simon pulled down his fence, salvaging the posts and rails for other uses. Cara brought her sheep over to graze the grass, and Simon's cattle joined them. They cut hay together in early September, working side by side with scythes and rakes, and stacked it in a shared barn that straddled the property line. It was hard work, but it was good work, and Simon found himself enjoying it in a way he had not enjoyed anything in a long time. He enjoyed the rhythm of the labor, the satisfaction of seeing the hay stacked and stored. He enjoyed the conversations with Cara, which had moved from legal arguments to discussions of farming techniques and weather patterns and the 100 small details of running a farm. He enjoyed her company. That was the truth he had been avoiding for months. Somewhere in the midst of all the arguing and stubbornness and legal wrangling, he had come to like Cara Farnley, more than like her. He looked forward to seeing her. He thought about her when they were apart. He found himself noticing small things. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was concentrating. The way her laugh was low and quiet but utterly genuine. The way she moved with an easy confidence that came from knowing her own strength. He realized with a shock, falling in love with her. The realization should have been absurd. They had spent most of the past months fighting. They were from different worlds, different species. There would be talk, disapproval, possibly worse. His neighbors would have opinions. The township would have opinions. Everyone would have opinions. But Simon found that he did not care about any of that. The only question that mattered was whether Cara felt the same way. He had no idea how to find out. Autumn came and the crops were harvested, and the shared land proved its worth. The hay they had cut together fed both herds through the winter. The pasture was richer and more productive than either of them had expected. The joint ownership, which had seemed like a compromise born of necessity, turned out to be genuinely beneficial. They were seeing each other almost every day now, checking on the animals, maintaining the fences, planning for the next season. And the more time Simon spent with Cara, the more certain he became that what he felt was real. But he still did not know how to tell her. The moment came unexpectedly, on an evening in late October. They had been working on repairing a gate on the shared land, and the work had run longer than expected. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and the air had the crisp edge of approaching winter. They had finished the repair and were standing by the gate, admiring their work, when Cara said something that made Simon laugh. He could not even remember what it was later, some dry observation about the stubbornness of rusted hinges. But he laughed and she smiled, and the light caught her face in a way that made his heart ache. And suddenly, they were arguing again, but about nothing important. About whether the gate should swing in or out, about the best kind of hinge, about whose idea it had been to place the gate there in the first place. It was the kind of argument they had been having all evening, all month, all year, but this time it felt different. This time there was no real heat to it, no genuine disagreement. It was almost playful. They argued their way along the fence line, section by section, as the sun sank lower and the shadows grew long. And somewhere in the middle of it, somewhere between one point and the next, Simon realized what he was doing. He was stalling. He was arguing because he did not want the evening to end, because he wanted to stay here with her, because he could not imagine anywhere else he would rather be. And he realized that if he did not say something now, he never would. "Cara," he said, interrupting her in mid-sentence. She stopped and looked at him, surprised. "What? I need to tell you something." "All right." Simon took a breath. This was harder than he had expected. He had faced down angry neighbors, stubborn animals, failed crops, all the difficulties of farming life. But this, telling a woman he loved her, was somehow more terrifying than any of that. "I have been thinking," he said, and then stopped, because that was the wrong way to start. "About what?" Cara prompted. "About us. About this." He gestured at the land around them, the shared ground, the fence line that no longer divided but connected. "About how we got here." "We argued our way here," Cara said, but there was a softness in her voice, a gentleness he had not heard before. "Yes. We did. And somewhere in all that arguing He trailed off again, and Cara waited, patient and still, her dark eyes on his face. "I fell in love with you," he said finally, the words coming out in a rush. "I know that is probably the last thing you want to hear. I know I have been difficult and stubborn and possibly insufferable. I know we have spent more time fighting than anything else. But the truth is that I love you, and I have for a while now, and I cannot keep pretending I do not." There was a long silence. Cara did not move, did not speak. Her expression was unreadable in the fading light. Simon felt his heart sinking. He had miscalculated. He had misread the situation entirely. She did not feel the same way. Of course she did not. He had been a fool to think otherwise. "I am sorry," he said. "I should not have said anything." "Forget I mentioned it, Simon," Cara said. "We can go back to how things were, just neighbors working together. I will not make it awkward." "Simon," Cara said again, more firmly. He stopped talking and looked at her. "You are an idiot," she said. Simon blinked. What?" "You are an idiot," Cara repeated. "I have been in love with you since July. You—" Simon could not quite process this. July, when we were digging the drainage ditches, when you finally stopped being so stubborn about the fence and admitted you were wrong. When you told me about your father. But you never said anything, neither did you, until now. I thought you would not feel the same way, and I thought you were still angry about the land dispute." They looked at each other and then, simultaneously, they both started to laugh. It was the laughter of relief, of absurdity, of two people who had been talking past each other for months and had finally, said what needed to be said. "We are both idiots," Simon said when he could speak again. "Agreed," Cara said. She stepped closer to him, and Simon saw that she was smiling, really smiling in a way he had never seen before. "So what do we do now?" "I have no idea," Simon admitted. "I did not plan past the part where I told you I loved you. I did not actually expect it to go well." "It seems to be going well so far." "It does it not?" Cara reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. Her skin was warm, her grip firm. "I suppose we could start by spending more time together that does not involve arguing about property lines." "That sounds like a good idea. And we could tell people, your neighbors, my neighbors, get the gossip over with." "There will be a lot of gossip," Simon warned. "I know. But I do not care. Do you?" Simon thought about it. He thought about what people would say, the disapproval, the judgment. He thought about his father, who had spent his life caring too much about what other people thought, about honor and reputation and family pride. And he realized that he did not want to live that way. "No," he said. "I do not care." Cara squeezed his hand. "Good. Then we will figure it out together." They stood there in the gathering dusk, hand in hand, and Simon felt something settle in his chest, something that had been tight and anxious for as long as he could remember. It was peace, he realized. It was contentment. It was the feeling of being exactly where he was supposed to be. "Cara," he said. "Yes. I really do love you, I know," she said. "And I love you too." They walked back to their respective farms as the stars began to come out, and Simon felt lighter than he had in years. The argument was over. The dispute was settled. And somehow, in the process, he had found something he had not even known he was looking for. The gossip, when it came, was about what Simon had expected. There were disapproving looks at the market, whispered conversations that stopped when he walked by, a few openly hostile comments from people who thought an orc had no place owning land, much less courting a human. But there was also support, quiet and steady, from people who had known Simon his whole life and trusted his judgment. His closest neighbors, a few friends from his younger days, the tavern keeper who had watched the whole dispute unfold, and thought it was about time the two of them sorted out their feelings. Cara faced her own share of disapproval, but she handled it with the same calm dignity she brought to everything else. She did not argue, did not defend herself, simply went about her business and let people think what they wanted to think. And gradually, as autumn turned to winter, the gossip died down. People had other things to talk about. The harvest, the weather, the upcoming holidays. Simon and Cara became just another couple, unremarkable in their everyday lives even if their circumstances were unusual. They spent the winter months planning for the spring, for the crops they would plant in the shared land, for the improvements they wanted to make to both farms. They spent evenings together, sometimes at Simon's house, sometimes at Cara's, talking and laughing and slowly learning the deeper rhythms of each other's lives. Simon learned that Cara had traveled widely before settling here, working the harvest circuits up and down the coast, and that she had a gift for languages and could speak 4 fluently. He learned that she was an excellent cook when she had time, and that she loved music, but could not sing to save her life. He learned that she had a sharp sense of humor and a surprisingly romantic streak, and that she cried at sad stories, but never in front of anyone if she could help it. Cara learned that Simon was more educated than most farmers, having spent 2 years at a small college before his father's illness called him home. She learned that he loved books and always had 1 or 2 on hand, that he could recite poetry from memory, that he had once thought about becoming a teacher before circumstances made that impossible. She learned that he was patient and kind and stubbornly optimistic, even when he was arguing a point he knew he would lose. They learned each other, in all the small and large ways that mattered, and the love that had started in the midst of argument deepened into something steady and true. Spring came again, and they planted the shared land together, working side by side in the warm sunshine. The crops came up strong and green, and the fields that had been the source of so much conflict became the foundation of something new. It was in late spring, on a day when the apple trees were blooming, and the air was sweet with the scent of flowers, that Simon asked Cara to marry him. They were walking the boundary of the shared land, as they often did, checking the fences and the drainage and the general health of the growing crops. It was a routine task, one they had done dozens of times, but Simon had been carrying the question around for weeks, waiting for the right moment. He was not sure this was the right moment. He was not sure there was such a thing as a right moment. But the day was beautiful, and Cara was beside him, and he could not wait any longer. "Cara," he said, "will you marry me?" She stopped walking and turned to look at him, her expression startled. "What? Will you marry me?" Simon repeated. "I know it is sudden. I know we have only been courting a few months, but I know how I feel, and I know what I want, and what I want is to spend my life with you." Cara was silent for a long moment, and Simon felt his heart hammering in his chest. He had not planned this, had not prepared a speech. He was just saying what was in his heart, and he had no idea if it was enough. "Simon," Cara said finally, "are you sure? Marrying me will make things harder for you. There are people who will never accept it, never approve. Your life would be easier if you chose someone else." "I do not want someone else, I want you." "But Cara, I have spent my whole life doing what was expected of me, farming this land because it was my family's land, living up to standards I did not set for myself, carrying my father's bitterness like it was my own. And then you came along, and suddenly everything changed. Suddenly I was arguing with someone who challenged me, who made me think, who made me laugh. Suddenly I was working with someone instead of against everyone. And I realized that I do not want to go back to the way things were. I want to move forward, with you." Cara looked at him with those dark, searching eyes, and Simon saw the moment she decided. Saw the softness come into her expression, the smile that started slow and then spread across her face like sunrise. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Simon let out a breath he had not realized he was holding and pulled her into his arms. She hugged him back, fierce and tight, and they stood there in the middle of the shared land, the disputed ground that had brought them together. And Simon felt a joy so complete it took his breath away. They planned the wedding for midsummer, to be held on the 12 acres that had once divided them and now bound them together. It was Cara's idea, and Simon loved it immediately. They would marry on the land itself, with the stream running through the middle of it, and they would invite everyone who wanted to come. And they would celebrate not just their union, but the resolution of the conflict that had defined so much of their lives. The preparations took weeks. They had to arrange for food, for seating, for a priest willing to perform a mixed-species marriage. That last part was harder than Simon had expected. The first priest they asked refused outright. The second said he would have to consult with his superiors. The third agreed immediately and turned out to be a cheerful old man who had performed weddings for 40 years and did not see any reason why an orc and a human should not marry if they loved each other. "Love is love," he said. "I learned that a long time ago. The rest is just details." They sent out invitations and waited to see who would come. Simon was prepared for some people to refuse, to stay away out of disapproval or prejudice. But he was pleasantly surprised by how many people accepted. Neighbors, friends, even a few people he had not expected. The tavern keeper, the blacksmith, the woman who ran the general store in town and had always been kind to Cara, and to Simon's shock, his Uncle Martin, his father's younger brother, who had not spoken to Simon in 2 years after a disagreement over the farm. "I heard you were getting married," Martin said when he arrived a few days before the wedding. "Heard you were marrying an orc woman. Thought I should come see for myself." Simon braced himself for a lecture for disapproval, but Martin just looked at him for a long moment and then smiled. "Good for you, boy," he said. "Your father would have hated it, which means it is probably the right thing to do." Simon did not know whether to laugh or be offended. "You did not like my father. I loved my brother," Martin said. "But he was a bitter, stubborn man who could not let go of things that did not matter. I did not want you to turn out the same way. I am glad you did not." It was the closest thing to a blessing Simon was going to get from his family, and he took it. The day of the wedding dawned clear and bright, perfect summer weather. Simon woke early, too nervous to sleep, and spent the morning helping to set up the site. They had erected a simple arbor at the center of the 12 acres, decorated with flowers and greenery. They had pulled up the old fence posts and split them for firewood, and used the wood to build trestle tables for the feast. The new stream ran through the middle of the space, crossed by a small wooden bridge Simon had built specially for the occasion. It was, he thought, as beautiful a wedding site as anyone could want. Cara arrived in the afternoon, accompanied by a small group of her friends, other orcs who had traveled from the northern farming communities to be there. Simon had not met them before, and he felt a moment of nervousness as they approached. But they were warm and welcoming, greeting him with handshakes and congratulations, and he realized that they had come to support Cara, to show that she was not alone. The ceremony itself was simple and short. The priest spoke about love and commitment, about the joining of 2 lives and 2 families. Simon and Cara exchanged vows, promising to support each other, to work together, to face whatever challenges came with honesty and courage. They exchanged rings, simple bands of silver that the blacksmith had made for them, and then it was done. They were married. The feast that followed was everything Simon had hoped for. There was food and drink in abundance, contributions from both their farms and from the guests who had come. There was music, provided by a fiddler from town and a drummer from Cara's community, who played intricate rhythms that Simon had never heard before. There was dancing and laughter and toasts that ranged from heartfelt to hilarious. Simon danced with his wife, on the grass of the shared land, and looked around at the people who had come to celebrate with them. His neighbors, her friends, strangers who had become allies. People who had looked past the differences and seen 2 individuals who loved each other. It was not perfect. There were people who had refused to come, who had made their disapproval clear. There would be challenges ahead, Simon knew. There would be more gossip, more judgment, more moments when they would have to defend their choices. But right now, in this moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was Cara's hand in his, and the music in the air, and the knowledge that they had built something together. Not just a marriage, but a partnership. Not just a resolution to a dispute, but a new way of living. As the sun set and the fires were lit, Simon pulled Cara aside for a moment of quiet. They stood together by the stream, watching the water flow past, listening to the sounds of celebration behind them. "Happy?" Cara asked. "More than I can say," Simon replied. "You?" "Yes. Although I am still surprised you wanted to get married on this land. The land we spent months arguing about." "That is exactly why I wanted to get married here," Simon said. "Because this land represents everything we went through to get here. All the stubbornness, all the arguments, all the hard work of learning to work together. It is a reminder that the best things are worth fighting for, even if sometimes we are fighting each other." Cara laughed and leaned against him, and Simon put his arm around her, holding her close. "I love you," she said. "I love you too." They stayed there for a while longer, and then they went back to their guests, to the celebration that would go on long into the night. They danced and ate and drank and laughed. And as the stars came out overhead, Simon felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was what he had been looking for, all those months ago when he had seen the moved stream and realized his world was changing. Not the resolution to a legal dispute, not the preservation of property boundaries, not the protection of family honor. This sense of belonging, of partnership, of love freely given and received. It had taken him a long time to find it, but now that he had, he was never going to let it go. The years that followed were good years. The shared land continued to be productive, and Simon and Cara expanded their holdings, buying an adjacent parcel when it came up for sale and adding it to their joint property. They raised sheep and cattle, grew grain and hay, and built a reputation as fair dealers and skilled farmers. They faced challenges, of course. There were bad harvests and harsh winters. There were livestock losses and equipment failures. There were moments of frustration when they disagreed about how to handle a situation, and they would find themselves arguing with the same intensity they had brought to their boundary dispute, though now the arguments ended with laughter and compromise, rather than anger and stubbornness. And there were the ongoing social challenges. Not everyone accepted their marriage. There were people in the township who made their disapproval clear, who refused to do business with them, who muttered about the contamination of the human bloodline and the dangers of interspecies relationships. But there were also people who supported them, who valued their work and their character, who saw past the surface differences to the people underneath. Over time, the disapproval faded, or at least became less overt. Simon and Cara were good neighbors, reliable and fair. They helped out in times of trouble. They contributed to the community. And gradually, grudgingly, even the most resistant people came to accept that they were here to stay. In their 3rd year of marriage, Cara became pregnant. It was unexpected, though perhaps it should not have been, and it filled Simon with a joy mixed with terror. He knew very little about children, and less about the specifics of orc human offspring. Cara assured him that everything would be fine, that she had talked to midwives and healers and knew what to expect, but Simon worried anyway. The baby was born in early spring, a healthy girl with green-tinged skin and small, barely visible tusks. They named her Giselle, and she had her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin. Simon held her for the first time and felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. "She is perfect," he said. "Of course she is," Cara replied, smiling tiredly from the bed. "She is ours." Giselle was followed 2 years later by another daughter, Fiona, and 2 years after that by a third, Grace. The farmhouse, once quiet, was now filled with noise and chaos and laughter. Simon learned to change diapers and soothe nightmares and braid hair. He learned the patience that comes from dealing with small children, and the deep, bone-deep love that makes all the sleepless nights and endless questions worthwhile. Cara was a wonderful mother, both fierce and gentle, teaching their daughters to be strong and kind and unafraid. She taught them about their Orcish heritage, about the history and culture of her people, and she also taught them about their human side, about Simon's family and the land they were farming and the community they were part of. The girls grew up knowing they were different, but also knowing they were loved. They grew up on the shared land, playing in the stream that had once been a source of conflict and was now just part of their home. They learned to work hard, to value honesty, to stand up for themselves and others. And they learned, by watching their parents, that love could bridge any divide. Simon and Cara grew older, as everyone does, and the farm grew with them. They added outbuildings, improved the infrastructure, invested in better tools and breeding stock. The shared land, once a symbol of compromise, became the most productive part of their holdings, and they expanded it further, negotiating with neighbors to extend the joint ownership concept to additional parcels. It was an unusual arrangement, but it worked. And in time, other farmers began to copy it, setting up shared grazing areas and joint water management projects. The model Simon and Cara had pioneered became a template for cooperation, a way of moving past rigid property boundaries to something more flexible and mutually beneficial. Simon sometimes thought about his father, about the bitterness that had consumed him over a lost boundary dispute. He thought about how different his own life had turned out, how a similar dispute had led not to resentment, but to love. He wished his father could have seen it, could have understood that letting go of anger was not weakness but strength. But perhaps, in some way, his father would have understood. Perhaps he would have been proud. Simon liked to think so. As the years passed and their daughters grew into young women, Simon and Cara settled into a comfortable rhythm. They still argued, of course. That had never stopped. But the arguments were gentler now, tempered by years of partnership and deep understanding. They knew each other's weaknesses and strengths, knew when to push and when to yield, knew that at the end of the day they were on the same side. One evening in late summer, when the sun was setting and the fields were golden with ripening grain, Simon and Cara walked out to the shared land together. It had been years since the wedding, years since the argument that had changed both their lives. But they still came here often, drawn by memory and sentiment. They stood by the stream, which had long since settled into its new course, and looked out over the land they had fought for and eventually shared. "You ever think about how we started?" Cara asked. "All those months of arguing." "All the time," Simon said. "I think about how stubborn I was, how certain I was that I was right. You were not the only stubborn one. I was just as bad, maybe, but I was the one who built the fence. And I was the one who told you to tear it down, and I did. Eventually." They smiled at each other, and Simon reached for Cara's hand, lacing his fingers through hers as he had done countless times over the years. "I am glad we argued," he said. "I am glad we were both too stubborn to back down, because if we had not been, we might never have learned to work together. We might never have fallen in love." "You think the arguing caused the love?" Cara asked, amused. "I think the arguing revealed the love. We were always going to love each other. We just had to get past our own stubbornness to see it." Cara leaned her head against his shoulder. "I suppose you are right, although I will deny saying that if you ever repeat it." Simon laughed. "Your secret is safe with me." They stood together in the fading light. Two people who had built a life from conflict and compromise, from anger and affection, from all the messy, complicated, beautiful parts of loving someone. The land stretched out around them, productive and peaceful, a testament to what could be achieved when people chose cooperation over conflict. And in the distance, they could hear their daughters calling, their voices bright and clear in the evening air, calling them home to dinner, to family, to the life they had built together. Simon squeezed Cara's hand, and they turned and walked back together, side by side, as they had been for years and would be for all the years to come. The shared land remained, a living monument to their love, and the stream flowed through it, constant and clear, marking not a boundary but a connection, not a division but a bridge between two lives that had become one. And that, Simon thought, was the best ending he could have hoped for. Not the ending he had expected when he first saw the moved stream all those years ago, but the ending he had needed. The ending that made sense of everything that had come before. He looked at his wife, his partner, his love, and smiled. "Ready to go home?" Cara asked. "Always," Simon said. "As long as home is with you." And hand in hand, they walked back to the farmhouse, to their daughters, to the life they had chosen together, the life that had started with an argument over a fence and had grown into something neither of them could have imagined. Love, Simon had learned, was not about perfection. It was not about avoiding conflict or always agreeing. It was about showing up day after day and choosing each other. It was about working together, even when it was hard. It was about building something that mattered, something that would outlast them both. And as he sat down to dinner with his family, surrounded by the noise and warmth of the home he and Cara had made, Simon knew with absolute certainty that he had found exactly what he had been looking for. He had found his place, he had found his purpose, and he had found his love, and that was everything,